I was 13 years old when my family decided to go on a trip to Antarctica. It was a big deal because we were traveling on a huge cruise ship, and I had never been on one before. I remember feeling excited, my mind buzzing with thoughts of the icy landscapes and the idea of exploring such a large ship. There were so many things to see, and I couldn't wait to check them out, my family, and I spent our days enjoying the ship's activities. But as night fell, things became quieter, calmer, almost eerie in the stillness. There was something about the vastness of the ship at night that made it feel almost alive one night. I couldn't sleep. I looked at the clock next to my bed. 2 a.m. The ship was silent apart from the occasional creak and groan as it moved through the water. My parents and little sister were fast asleep in our cabin. The quietness felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I decided that this would be the perfect time to explore the ship by myself. I didn't think I'd get into any trouble. After all, how much could happen on a cruise? I slipped out of bed, careful not to make any noise, and quietly opened the cabin door. The hallway outside was dimly lit, and the long corridor stretched ahead of me like a tunnel. It felt strange to be walking alone at this hour, but I was too curious to turn back. I wandered down the hall through the empty dining area and then to one of the upper decks. That's when I saw him. A boy, maybe around 17 or 18 years old, was standing near the railing looking out over the dark sea. His name was Robert, though I didn't know that at the time. He turned when he noticed me, and for a moment I felt uneasy. His eyes were sharp, and there was something about his expression that made me pause. "You're out late," he said, his voice low but friendly enough. "What are you doing wandering around at this hour?" I shrugged. "Just couldn't sleep, wanted to explore." Robert smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Perfect timing. "I know this ship inside and out. I can show you around if you want." I wasn't sure what to say. A part of me was thrilled by the idea of seeing parts of the ship I hadn't yet explored, but another part of me felt off. But Robert seemed confident, like he knew what he was doing. So I agreed. We walked together, moving through parts of the ship that seemed to be completely deserted as we went along. Robert started talking about himself. He told me that he had been on the cruise for weeks, traveling from one place to another. He said he knew all the secrets of the ship, the places where no one went, the best spots to hide if you didn't want to be found. At first I thought it was cool. Who wouldn't want to know all the hidden places on a ship this big? But then his story started to get darker. He talked about sneaking into passengers' cabins when they weren't there, stealing things, just for the thrill of it. He even laughed as he described taking a wallet from a man who was fast asleep by the pool. I remember feeling uncomfortable as he spoke. His grin widened as he told me about the rush he got from doing bad things like robbing people for fun. He talked about how easy it was to get away with it on a cruise. Everyone was on vacation. No one was paying attention. "I could teach you," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We could be a team. You'd never get caught." That was the moment I knew I had to get away from him. My heart was pounding and my hands were sweaty. This wasn't the kind of adventure I wanted. I just wanted to explore the ship, not get mixed up in something bad. I made some excuses about being tired and needing to get back to my cabin. Robert just nodded, still smiling as if he knew something I didn't. I hurried back to my cabin, my footsteps quick and quiet on the carpeted floor. When I closed the door behind me, I felt a huge wave of relief. I didn't want to think about Robert or the things he'd said. I crawled back into bed, pulling the blanket up to my chin, and tried to push it all out of my mind. For the next few days, I avoided going out alone at night. I stuck close to my family and made sure I didn't run into Robert again. It was easy enough. There were hundreds of passengers on the ship, and I didn't see him during the day. Then something happened that I'll never forget. A man was caught stealing from a wealthy businessman on the ship. He had stolen a gold watch, something very valuable. I overheard some of the adults talking about it, saying that the thief had been arrested and was being held by the ship's security until we reached the next port. My heart sank when I heard them mention the thief's name. It was Robert. If I had stayed with him that night, if I had accepted his offer to team up, I might have been caught too. I couldn't believe how close I had come to getting involved in something terrible. I was lucky, so lucky, that I hadn't listened to him. The rest of the trip felt different. After that, the excitement I had felt at the beginning was gone, replaced by a quiet unease. I stayed with my family and made sure I was never alone again. The cruise was beautiful and the sights were incredible, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something very dangerous. I never saw Robert again after he was arrested, and I was glad. I work for a small tech company and get along pretty well with my boss, Dave. He's one of those guys who are easygoing and friendly. So when he invited me to go on a cruise with his family, I didn't think twice it was going to be a 5-day trip. Just to get away from the daily grind, he brought along his wife, Karen, and his teenage son, Alex. Alex was about 16, a good kid. But you know how teenagers are quiet and always on their phone. The first few days of the cruise were amazing. The food was great, the weather was perfect, and we had a good time exploring the different stops. There was plenty to do on board: swimming pools, game rooms, shows. Alex mostly kept to himself, hanging around the pool and meeting a few other kids his age. Everything seemed perfect. Then one night, things took a dark turn. I remember going to bed around midnight. My cabin was a couple of doors down from Dave's family suite. I was pretty tired after a long day in the sun, so I fell asleep quickly. The gentle rocking of the ship made it easy to drift off at around 1:30 a.m. I was jolted awake by a loud knock on my door, groggy and confused. I stumbled out of bed, wondering what was going on when I opened the door. There was Dave, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. "Has Alex come back to your room?" he asked, his voice trembling. Why would he be here?" I replied, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Dave looked at me with a mix of fear and confusion. He never came back to our room after dinner. We thought maybe he crashed here or with one of the other teens. Immediately, I felt a knot form in my stomach. Something was wrong. We both quickly got dressed and headed to the ship's customer service desk. Dave's wife, Karen, had already called them, but now we needed to make sure a full search was underway. They took it seriously, of course. A teenager missing on a cruise ship. That's no joke. Within minutes, they announced a search over the loudspeaker, and a team of staff started combing the decks. The ship was massive, like a floating city, so finding someone on it wasn't an easy task. We searched everywhere: the pool deck, the restaurants, the game rooms, the theaters, but there was no sign of Alex as the hours passed. Panic set in. I could see it in Dave and Karen's faces. And to be honest, I was feeling it too. This was supposed to be a fun, relaxing trip. How did it turn into a nightmare? So fast. By 3 a.m., the ship's crew suggested we start checking some of the closed-off areas, the empty rooms, and parts of the ship that weren't being used. It was a long shot, but at that point we were desperate. We split into groups, each of us assigned to a different part of the ship. I ended up with one of the ship's security guards, a big guy with a stern face. We started going through the empty rooms one by one. When most of them were completely dark, the lights off the beds made it was eerie how quiet it was. The only sound was the hum of the ship's engines in the background. Then, just as we were about to call it quits, we opened a door and found him. Alex was sitting on the floor, his hands tied behind his back with rope, his mouth gagged with a dirty cloth. His eyes were wide with terror. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like something out of a horror movie. We rushed to untie him, and as soon as the gag was out of his mouth, he started crying. He was shaking, and his face was pale. He told me not to say anything. Alex stammered barely, able to get the words out. He said if I told anyone, he'd kill my family, who I asked, my heart pounding, "Who did this to you?" Alex looked around nervously as if the man might be standing right behind us. A man dressed in black. He grabbed me when I was walking back to the room. He dragged me in here and tied me up. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't some prank or misunderstanding. Someone had deliberately taken him and threatened him, and that someone was still on the ship. We immediately called security and they locked down the area. They started reviewing security camera footage, trying to find any sign of the man Alex had described. Meanwhile, Dave and Karen were beside themselves with relief and terror. They couldn't believe what had just happened to their son. Then things took another unexpected twist the next morning after hours of reviewing footage and interviewing staff. Security identified a suspect. It was someone we all knew, a guy from our company. I couldn't believe it. He was just a quiet guy from the accounting department. We'd had drinks with him the night before, and he seemed completely normal. But there he was, caught on camera, lurking around the empty parts of the ship following Alex. When security brought him in, he didn't even try to deny it. He just sat there staring at the ground as they cuffed him and handed him over to the authorities. At the next port, it turned out he had some sort of grudge against Dave. He thought kidnapping Alex would scare Dave and ruin him, but he didn't count on the ship's security and the cameras catching him even now, months after the cruise. I still think about that night, the way the ship felt so peaceful and safe, only to turn into a place of fear and danger, and that quiet guy from accounting, someone I would have never suspected, planning something so twisted. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to set foot on a cruise ship again. The ocean may be vast, but nowhere is safe when you don't know what kind of monsters might be hiding in plain sight.